I want to try to make a fur brush. We're going to start from scratch. We're going to create a new brush. These are the defaults that we come up with. For making a new brush, I like to start with a spacing of 10%. And I like to turn off the Apple Pencil. And what this gets us is this very nice smooth brush. And I like to make notes. I turn my spacing at 10. I do jitter on the side, and what that means is I will put my jitter to 30%, click done, and there's a 30% jitter. 0 for the plus, the X, and the O. And this will allow me to see how the brush behaves going left, right, up, down, diagonal, and in curves. The Apple Pencil is zeroed out, and I like to start with a brush size of 20. So let's set it to that. The rendering is currently at the default of intense glaze, but I need to know which brush I'm going to use, which shape, which grain. So I will go through all the different shapes, edit, source library, Chinese ink, and this is, whoops, might help if I save that. Click done, there we are. And a grain of blank. And then we'll change the grain to diagonal, and then we'll change it to bark. And just keep doing that over and over again until we have all the different permutations available. To make this easy on myself, I have created grids. So here's, well, it's the wrong one. So here you can see, using the blank, I have tried out each and every one of these, Chinese ink, ink sponge, ink dry, all the way down to see which ones look more like fur. And ink sponge and ink dry are promising, but not quite what I'm looking for. The ink sponge has a really nice beginning and end. The smooth circle is eh. The jitter is just not very fur-like. The same thing here with the ink dry. The beginning and end seem to be okay, and the going around the circle, that has nice variety to it, but the jitter doesn't look very much like fur. It looks more like chalk. So I went through and I just kept testing various ones until I came here to this ink sponge, and I like that. The ink sponge has that varied on the smooth circle. It's not completely clear around the edges, and it has a good beginning and end. And this jitter of 30% kind of looks a little bit like really short fur to me. So we're going to use this ink sponge. And what we do is we select it, just that one, and import it into a grain grid. This is all the grains, and we're going to use ink sponge, which I've already copied over, on these various grains. So to set this up, I'm going to duplicate each of these layers, 9, 10, 11, and 12. I'm going to fill in with white and merge down, fill and merge down, fill, merge down, fill, and merge down. Then I'm going to merge these shapes, the ink sponge 2, onto each of these layers so that I can be reminded of which shape I'm trying in this particular grain library. So we'll start here. We've got a shape of ink sponge 2, which, as you can see, is nice and round. It has some transparencies, that's the grayer areas, some solids, which is the white, and a nice rough edge. And let's go ahead and set up the jitter of 30 so that we have that here. Let's choose a color we can see. This peach color looks nice. And I'll take the jitter off. And we put in the tests for our plus. Our X. And our O. So I'm going to do this with each of the various grains. We'll go into grain, edit, import, source library. Next one is diagonal. And I will continue doing this until I have all of these filled in for layers 9, 10, 11, and 12. Alright, so I was going through all the different permutations. This is a couple of hours later. You can see that we've got the blank here, and that was nice and promising. A lot of these other ones, not so much. Using the intense glaze, which is the default. You know, I thought maybe one of these charcoals would look nice. And the 6B looks okay, but it's a little too light for me. The charcoal coarse, it's just too grainy to be fur. So I continued on. These other charcoals, same thing. And then I got to clouds 2, and this looks very promising indeed. So we test it out. Let's do a circle. And I like the way it comes up with that little shine there. It's completely random, but it looks nice. So if I just dab around the edges here. And that looks very nice, I think. So let's try it out with the smudge tool. And yeah, you can make some nice fluffy fur with this. And we'll just undo all of this. There we go. So we have our first brush, which I'm going to call Fur 1. And we'll create a reset point. We have our second brush, which I'm going to call Fur 2. And we'll create a reset point there. And to summarize, we've got spacing at 10%, no taper. The shape is this ink sponge 2. Had to look that up. The grain is clouds. Rendering is intense glaze. Everything else is the default. I didn't change any wet mix, color dynamics. The Apple Pencil, of course, we turned the opacity off. And I haven't changed anything in the properties. So that gives us 2 fur brushes. And we're now going to start playing with some other settings. What I've done here is I have created another grid. We've got the shape is ink sponge. We've got the blank grain and the clouds 2 grain. Those are our 2 brushes, Fur 1 and Fur 2. And now we're going to play around. We're going to play around with Fur 2 since it has the active grain, lights and shadows and whatnot. So let's go in here. I've duplicated Fur 2. I want to give it just a very slight jitter, I think. Just so it kind of wiggles ever so slightly. You may not even notice. And I want it to fade out a little bit as you go. So, I don't know, maybe 20. These are all just guesses, of course. Let's hit done. Yeah, it definitely fades out there. Okay. And how much does it jitter? Not really very much. You can barely notice it. By the way, I've increased my brush size to 50% here, since we're not trying to fight up against other shapes and grains. Yeah, I guess this is good, but what if we want to change this? Let's turn this on. Maybe go down about so far for pressure, same for touch. Let's see what that does. That doesn't seem to do too much. Okay, well, I'm not going to worry about it then. I'm going to put it all back. Let's look at her shape. Scatter's going to give it a kind of a grainy feel. I want it to be streaky. So let's see. Let's try increasing the scale here. As you can see, increasing and decreasing the scale alters the way the brush looks. Where you're going, I kind of like the way 30 looks. Let's try that. And not quite as many gaps. We still get those little shine areas. Let's see what the difference is between these two. We've got this one. We've got this one. I think there's enough of a difference there that we now have a Fur 3 brush. And that was by changing the grain, I think. Yeah, but just the scale to 30%. There we go. So that's Fur Brush 3. We're going to duplicate that one. Let's see. Let's see what light glaze does. I don't like light glaze. We'll try uniform glaze. I don't think there's enough of a difference to make any keeper on that one. We'll try heavy glaze. And actually, let's keep a Fur 3 circle up here just so we have something to compare with. There's a difference, but I don't really like it. Let's try uniform blending. Hmm. See, that looks more like hair strands than that does. More fine hair. Okay. So that's a possibility. Let's try intense blending. Oh yeah, I like that even better. The uniform blending is a little bit lighter, and I like the darker on the intense blending. So we're going to have an intense blending brush. Yes, I like that. All right, so here we are in a relatively short time. If you consider the fact that it took me 2 hours to go from nothing to the first brush, and then another 2.5 hours to go from that to the second brush. But we now have 4 fur brushes. We've got fur 1, fur 2, fur 3, and fur 3 intense. So that's not too bad. We need to see if we can't make something out of it. Um, you know, I want to see what happens if we play with the color dynamics. We'll change the hue just slightly, change the lightness. Let's add a secondary color. So, let's make this brown. Well, it certainly does give it a difference there. There's more of a texture than a color. Let's try that with the stroke instead. 6% there, 33% there, 12% there. Oh yeah, see that's a big difference. Maybe too big of a difference. Let's put the hue down to 4%. Let's cut the light down a little bit. Let's make that 15. We want variations in our fur, but we don't want to go too far. What happens if we change saturation to 4% instead? Hue is the color, red, blue, green, yellow, etc. Saturation is how intense that color is. Oh, look. Yeah, I think we might could do something with this. Let's decrease the brush opacity a little bit. And we've made a critter. Okay, yeah, this would actually be good for doing pets. Or furry animals like bunnies and fluffy baby bears. All right, so that is the process that I use to figure out how to make a new brush. I hope you found it helpful, and you have a wonderful day.